that's not what I'm interested in, or any of us is going to be interested in 30 years when everybody who saw the Grateful Dead is dead, and all we have is the same thing we have of Billie Holiday or Jimmy Rogers, just music.
3, 2, 1. When it comes to the Grateful Dead, I'm a latecomer. It's taken me a long time to come around on them, even though I was first intrigued by their music all the way back in 1987. But for a number of reasons that you'll hear about in this clip, I chose not to pursue it. In fact, I was turned off by several aspects of the whole Grateful Dead phenomenon. More interestingly, this is something I actually share in common with Canadian author Ray Robertson, who, in spite of the fact that he's just written a book about the Grateful Dead titled All the Years Combined, The Grateful Dead in 50 Shows, was also initially turned off. He never would have considered himself a Deadhead, but he calls himself that now. So much so, in fact, that Robertson was commissioned to write the liner notes for 2 Grateful Dead releases in 2023. The 17-disc box set Here Comes Sunshine, which I included in my year-end box set list for Spin Magazine, and Dave's Picks number 45. So how does a guy who's like, nah, I don't like the Grateful Dead, I don't like improvisational music, end up writing these liner notes and a book going through all the live recordings? Well, you're about to find out. Robertson is also the author of novels like I Was There the Night He Died, Moody Food, and Estates Large and Small, among others. He's written several nonfiction books as well, including All the Years Combined, Lives of the Poets, and How to Die, a book about being alive. It is my pleasure to have as a guest on FeedbackDef, Ray Robertson. All right, so I'll tell you off the bat, I am only sticking my toe in the water with the Grateful Dead and their live recordings, although I have been flirting with doing so for over 35 years, and I will explain when it makes more sense to do that, to sort of tee up your response to. I want to go to your protagonist, Phil Cooper, first.
Oh, okay, cool.
In your novel, Estates Large and Small. Because at one point in that book, now I haven't finished any of your books, just so you know. But I've been digging around. I've been digging around. And at one point in that book, he says, I used to be in a relationship for nearly 10 years, but then I met Jerry Garcia's guitar and some good weed.
Yeah.
Now, I was incorrectly under the impression that you didn't become a Deadhead until after you conceived of this character, Phil Cooper, but I'm pretty sure that's wrong.
Yeah, I think, no. First it was the Dead. At the end of All the Years Combined, there's a little essay at the end called How I Became a Deadhead, which is.
Well, I know some of that. I know some of that because from the Dave's Picks.
Right.
You know, you stumbled across this used copy
of
a live album Jerry Garcia did with I guess he's a soul jazz organist, Merle Saunders.
Merle Saunders, yeah. So it's kind of like you in a way, I guess. I don't know. Sounds like it in the sense that it had always been something that I'd always kind of been interested in. I mean, I always loved, but I was always a sort of a country rock, alt country guy. So Working Man's Dead and American Beauty were always there, great songs. But I just, I grew up in a time when guitar solos were an indication of, musical masturbation, just wait for the solos to get over with so I could get to the song kind of thing. And with first Garcia and then through the Dead, I think that my ears were finally ready to, hear someone who had something to say. For me, Garcia's guitar wasn't a matter of expertise. He was actually speaking, the way people speak of Coltrane or Miles Davis, or he wrote in paragraphs. He played in paragraphs, and so I just found that really intriguing. And from that actually was my conduit into not just the Dead, because the Jerry solo stuff is very different from the Grateful Dead, but also into jazz, which I never thought would be my cup of tea. And now I got my likes and my dislikes, and it's opened up a whole new world. So yeah, that's kind of how it happened. As for Estates Large and Small, I don't really remember, ideas or anything, but I do remember thinking that Phil and his predilection for the dead and increasing predilection for the dead, and well, it just suited his character. He's a bookseller during the pandemic, loses his business because of Toronto rent hikes and stuff. It just seemed to be sort of represent that sort of stasis in his life where everything it's sort of perpetually simmering, but nothing's really happening. So it seemed kind of like, for me, a book, it's working when these metaphors start to pop up. Like you don't come up with them; they just sort of, oh, that's interesting. It's kind of almost like you have to just write it to discover it. So I thought that I was onto something with Phil. It almost worked, metaphorically in terms of his. Although in the book he is kind of burned out on the dead, and that's one of the problems. So
Right. I was going to say it sounded like that was more of a symbol,
yeah,
almost the way Gord Downey would use and I know that's an obvious, I know I'm not just saying that because you're Canadian, but the way he would refer to a place, but not really always be meaning the place.
yeah,
It represented something else.
yeah, yeah. I mean, anything that's if Moby Dick is just a symbol, then it's not a very good symbol. It's got to be a whale first. It's got to be a whale before it can be a symbol of the amoral nature of the universe and the human desire to impose meaning upon it. It's got to be a real big whale. And then as the book goes along, you start to get this creepy feeling like, geez, why is this guy insistent on killing this? But they're willing to die for this? This is more than pounded by it. And then going for a walk with the dog thinking, that's kind of interesting, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I lost you for you froze for most of that.
Oh, I'm
Sorry about
sorry.
that. You said they're
It was
willing to
really
die.
eloquent too.
I am sure they're willing to die for this, and then it just and then I heard dog.
Okay. What were we talking about?
It has to be a whale first and not just a
Oh,
symbol.
right. Yeah.
And
Well,
then
no.
as you
After a while, you realize that Ahab is willing to kill everyone, including himself, to get this whale. So you realize it's more than just a whale, But it isn't stated on page one. The whale is a symbol of the amoral nature of the universe. It's a whale, and then it accrues. And so, with a novel, or even with good nonfiction, I think the meaning sort of sneaks up on you. I mean, to me, I just want to have a lot of fun when I read. I want good sentences, I want humor, and I want insightful writing. But then as page by page, sentence by sentence. But then as it adds up, you hope that there's not a deeper meaning, but there's more heft to it. It's
that
kind
there's
of like
more of a resonance
yeah, yeah,
on some other level. And
yeah,
I find that that's most rewarding when it sneaks up on the author or the writer of song lyrics as
yes,
well. That they're just a lot of times, so many songwriters will describe this. They're just throwing out terms,
yeah,
and then suddenly it coheres into something that's, oh yeah, that means something to me, but I wasn't aware. I was kind of being led blindly.
yes. Well, there's a great line by Flannery O'Connor in one of her essays when she talks about how if the writer isn't surprised occasionally in the act of writing, the reader won't be either. You almost
Right.
have to, and that happened a few times in the State Sergeant Small, where I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And then I wrote it, this doesn't, he wants to do this, or he's not going to do this, whatever. And that's always a really good sign, that you're not completely, your logical brain is not the thing. I mean, my brain doesn't have that much going on in it. I need to sort of be a conduit for other things. Anything that I can come up with is something that's been thought 2,500 years ago. It's not unique, but maybe my unique take on it, which I'm not even aware of, coming to, for example, exploratory jam-based music from a position of somebody who didn't like that kind of stuff, maybe gives me a different perspective when I write about it. So it's a process of, there's actually, now that you mention it, it's interesting. There's sort of a correlation between writing a novel or writing a book and a good jam, in the sense that you have something to start with, whether it be a jazz guy having a head and then going, so I knew that it was set in Toronto and not, Istanbul, and it was this and that. But all the other stuff, part of the fun is saying, I don't know what's going to happen today. I don't know what's going to go on, that kind of thing. And I think if that's lost, I think you get kind of safe books, kind of formulaic books that, may serve a purpose, but they're not for me as a writer or as a reader.
Well, and so often you can tell that someone has contrived the metaphor first, which
Right.
I always think just is so flat and
Right.
so
Yeah.
forced
Yeah.
and empty, and you feel like you're being preached. It's very didactic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like it's like the prose equivalent of when characters on screen speak. the point that the
Yeah.
filmmaker's trying to
When
make.
when I used to teach literature, I used to say, or creative writing, I used to say, because most of the students' stories always ended with, and I knew that summer that I would never be the same because I had learned a lesson about, at the end. Whereas, again, coming back to O'Connor, I love this book that she wrote called Mystery Manners, or she didn't write it, it was published posthumously, it was her talks. And she talks about there should be this sort of like blind groping, the metaphor that you use. But when it's all done, when it's in a book form or an album or a song, you go, oh, wow, it just fell from the sky and it was perfect. And that's why we love art, because it doesn't have these indeterminate little stops and starts along the way. It just has this flow. This book, for example, all the years combined, the introduction originally started with the how I became a deadhead, and then there was a break, and then there was the what's the introduction now. And we were getting close to the copy editing stage when I was just sitting around one night, probably listening to Dead High, and I thought, no, that belongs at the end of the book. It's not. Oh, it's this. Oh, I know. Well, I'll call it a bonus track. That'll be. And now it looks really cool. I think. I think it worked better. But it really had been like that for about a year with it being in the beginning. And I shudder now to think, oh my God, if I made someone stuff, people want to read about the Grateful Dead. They don't want about me. Now, if they get to the end of the book and they find the journey interesting, maybe they will want to read the essay. But initially, I had it there, and I was sure, like I say, we were getting ready to put it into copy edit, and I find that exciting, a little bit scary. But isn't that what the best music is? When there's a bit of an opportunity for failure, an opportunity for the capricious to sneak in. I like that. I don't like, and that's the problem with the Dead later on to me is that it becomes very much, for the most part, here's the show and here's what we do in the show, and the audience has show expectations. Where earlier on, the delightful part is that they really did play to get off themselves. They really did want to, maybe we can transcend in Cincinnati tonight, on a Tuesday night or something. I love that. I find that very inspiring, not just as an artist, but as a person. There's a show, I don't know if you got that, read that show, but there's a 73 show from Nassau when they're doing the other one, which is, by in that period, it's a 20, 25-minute song. And they get about 8 minutes into it, real kind of spacey, real kind of, and then out of that, Garcia plays the opening notes to Eyes of the World, this very samba-esque, very sunny. And they never come back to Eyes of the World. And I just remember just listening to it, just like cheering, like, yeah, you don't feel like playing it. Don't play it. And I can't imagine the Rolling Stones saying, I'm tired of playing Satisfaction. We'll just play a few minutes of it. We'll go into a new song. No, you got to play the song. People came to hear and I just love that. It's almost like a delightful amateurishness about it. I think music is obviously died of professionalism. It became too much product. When
Mhm.
it got mixed up with big business. As inevitably happens. So I loved particularly early on the Dead, just that sense of let's see where this goes. Let's see what happens.
Right. You say right off the bat in the intro to All the Years Combined that they became, and I'm paraphrasing here, but more dull and corporate
Yeah,
as we get
I,
into
I
the
try
80s.
not to.
More
I
of
probably didn't use those words, but you're
you didn't, and I could read the exact quote, but it was
no, no,
it's
you're in the ballpark though. Yeah,
it's like they became sort of a stock, well, their version of sort of a stock arena stadium rock band.
yes, and that's a great way of putting it because and I know people who went to those shows and they had life changing experiences, and but if I talked to them, it was usually about more the interpersonal stuff, the show, the people, the relationships, the friendships they made, and I have to acknowledge that that's a huge part of it. That's not what I'm interested in, or any of us is going to be interested in 30 years when everybody who saw the Grateful Dead is dead, and all we have is the same thing we have of Billie Holiday or Jimmy Rogers, just music.
Hmm.
So what I'm kind of a headphone deadhead in the sense that I like to sit down and go, okay, this is the music. It doesn't matter to me where I'm standing, or I'm just sitting in my chair and listening. And that's interesting because it's going to happen in my lifetime, or just after my lifetime, I guess. That no one will have ever seen the Grateful Dead, so we'll just have the music, and there's something really liberating about that. Something it either lives or it doesn't, you know. And a lot of music doesn't, but I'm positive their music will be as long as there's the good stuff anyway. Yeah.
Right. That's actually what turned me off
What's that?
to okay, so I I was gonna save this for a little bit later, but I will chart you through my journey with them and
Okay.
where I'm at so far, and it'll take me a minute, but it's to set it up for you to kind of tee off on that.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Um, so a friend of mine from high school named Dave, Deadhead, when the anniversary of Sergeant Pepper's in '87
87. Yeah.
happened, um, he loaned me Sergeant Pepper's, and I think it was a Grateful Dead's greatest hits, the first Warner Brothers one from the first three albums.
Yeah. Right.
And at that point, I was discovering metal. I would have been not even 15 yet, but I liked a lot of what I heard, and I was really into the sort of post psychedelic poppy kind of the song craft,
Right.
which is not what I thought people were attracted to the Dead for.
Right.
And so I was always in the back of my mind. I was like, okay, mental note. I want to get
Yeah.
more
Right.
into their stuff. And then as I got into my 20s and the 90s, that whole circus of
Yeah.
I don't even know what to call it, this like traveling circus and this something about it just
I'm the
really
same.
turned me off.
Me
And
too.
that the music itself didn't even seem like the focal point. It was this, and a lot of it struck me as really rather dark, that there's all this like hallucinogen drug exchange going on, and that can be transcendent, but there's something about it seemed seedy to me.
Well, yeah, in the way that it was used in the '90s. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I'll let you talk. Sorry. Sorry. That's
Yeah,
last
no,
thing.
no, no, that's okay. And then I was like, well, there's also something really lethargic about what this band is live, and so I never went back. I never explored it. Fast forward to about 2020. I believe it was on recommendation from a musician I know named Zachary, and he was talking about American Beauty.
Right.
Listened to American Beauty and was absolutely blown away by it. I was
Yeah.
like, whoa,
Great,
okay, okay.
great songs. It's a great song.
Uh, this now I'm like my antenna are up.
Right.
And then right around that time, I was in a Lyft or an Uber, and the driver was, I could tell there was a live Dead recording, and he was like, "Oh, I have this app. I think it's called Dead of the Day. I
Right.
think that's
Yeah.
the app."
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That day show.
it plays a recording of a show on the same day you're listening, and I was like so enthralled, and it sounded so beautiful. I was like, okay, now I really have to get into this stuff.
Right.
Then I reviewed the reissue of Bob Ware's Ace album,
Oh, okay.
and
Right.
yeah, there's a recording, a really recent, I think it's from 2021 or early 2022. It's like really recent, where he's playing with like a new crop of people,
Yeah. The
and
Wolf
it
Brothers. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and it has that
Yeah.
same quality. And so now I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, look, now you really gotta. And then the Here Comes Sunshine box
Right.
out, and I come across this YouTube clip of Eyes of the World, funnily enough.
Ah. Okay.
And again, it has this sublime quality.
Oh, yeah.
So now I'm expecting that any show I pick is gonna knock me out.
Right.
And
Any
then,
era.
right, but then I strike out four times in a row.
Right.
And I just want to, again, this is taking me a bit this, but I just want to read to you this email that I sent to my friends because I think it'll ring bells.
Okay.
So I'm like, hey guys, I tried RFK 73, Fox Theater St. Louis 71, Cornell 77, and then the official live album Europe 72. And I write to my friends, I didn't outright dislike any of those, but they all lacked the qualities that really grabbed me. And they reminded me why I was so averse to their whole thing throughout my 20s in the first place. I'm realizing now that I wasn't exactly wrong. I really like it when they do Americana, but I don't like it when they sound dusty and lacking in energy. It feels like you could have gone to see them and ended up watching something that just simmered the whole time without really catching fire. My favorite stuff by them has this incredible ambient sparkle to it, like the sonic equivalent of a field of fireflies on a summer night. None
Right.
of the recordings or performances above have that glow that I'm hungry for now that I've had a taste. So that I'll let you. I know that was a long setup,
It's a lot
but
to unpack there.
yes, but so I guess the thing that struck me about your book right away is that you're not one of these fans
Right.
that is so much of a super fanatic that you love everything they do.
Right.
And it seems to me like in reading your book that anybody who tries to find a way into this like ocean of live recordings, you end up sounding like a wine aficionado because there's going to be things that click with
Yeah,
you and things that don't.
yeah. Well, unless, like you say, it's all good, and I've gotten a lot of negative feedback on that. I've been called a hater, and my favorite is an eraist. You're an
Hmm.
eraist. No, I just have good taste. Sorry, it's like when when somebody said that Lester Bangs was nostalgic. He said, "No, I just have good taste. That's all." You're not nostalgic when you like Mozart, but
You're just you're discerning, like as
yeah, I
you.
mean, I'm not saying I'm not claiming infallibility or omniscience. Since this book's been published, I thought, oh, I should maybe, but no, but there was the things that you were looking for are similar to what I look for in music. That said, things do change. I never thought that I would think a 20-minute song was too short. That just is unfathomable to me. But now I'm like, oh, the song's over already. And the energy is a huge element of it. Now, when they're in their 20s, that's not a problem, off nights or whatever. But when you become a professional, I mean, the same thing applies to anything, being a writer. And that's why I love the way that amateurishness I was talking about, that sense of, aw shucks, let's see what happens. And when things become formalized and formulaic, and, like in the 80s, they introduced this thing called space,
Mm-hmm.
which I say in the book is kind of like a long married couple who says, "Okay, we gotta have more sex. Let's have sex every other Saturday night." And it was kind of like, "Oh, every show, let's have a little bit of experimentation," which that's antithetical to me. What it means, I mean, there's a story. You probably know that Bruce Hornsby played with him a bit near the end when they had a keyboardist die, Brett Medley died and stuff. And when we think of Bruce Hornsby, we think of a really great guy and a good, wonderful piano player. But we don't think of him as like out there. And he said one of the disappointing ones because he was in a Dead cover band. He was in university in the 70s. So he played with Dead, like, whoa. And he admired Jerry. Like he thought Jerry was right there with Coltrane. He was right there. But he would say, geez, these guys, like I would say, hey, how about we start the show with this? Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, let's do that. But I got to go and do this, and he's got to do this, and I got to take my kids over here. So yeah, that's a great idea. He said nothing would ever change because it was just getting through tonight's 65,000 people show and getting on the limos and the plane and going to the next one. And Jerry's probably huffing some heroin backstage. It really becomes, when it comes to job, you know, I think something's lost. And it's interesting because we want people to have lives, you want to have a relationship and a car that runs and a house. And so it's really, to me, part of all the years combined, the book is about success in our part of the world. I don't say America, because that's where the dead live, but North America or the West or whatever, in the sense. And I think that was one of the things that really, like, literally quite depressed Garcia, was that this guy was a beatnik. He believed in all of the values of the beats. And here he is, a really, really overworked American businessman with a lot of people in their community who were dependent upon him. I mean, they took very good care of all of their people, and they hired their friends, and everybody had great health care, and everybody got paid and got bonuses, which meant, though, that you got to play the hockey rinks, you got to play the football stadiums, you got to play the same songs over and over again. Garcia, at the end of his career, some of his favorite music that he played and some of the best music was just playing acoustic music with David Grisman.
Right. Where there
you
was a
know,
lot less pressure and exposure and a lot less hinged on it
yeah,
or
yeah. I
staked
don't
on
want
it.
to. Yeah, yeah, and one of the interesting things that McNally said, or not McNally, Hornsby said. I don't think it was in Dennis McNally's book. It was someone else. But anyways, he said one of the worst feelings in the world was we would play a show when he sat in with them for several months, on and off, and everybody knew it wasn't a good. Like, we'd look at each other kind of like, and the crowd would be going crazy,
Mm.
fists in the air and baseball caps on backwards and beers held high. And he thought, wow, this is not where I was in 1972, where the ecosystem was, if you were into the Dead, you didn't hear it on the radio for the most part. Someone turned you on to it. You didn't see it on TV. You didn't see it on much MTV. You didn't. It was kind of like, hey man, check this out. So the scene was smaller, and I think there was a better class of audience who were more into it for the musical thing. Whereas, but it became entertainment, and I think that being entertaining is an essential part of any art. Like, I don't ever want to be bored. That's the number one sin. but I don't think that the artist should set out to entertain me. He or she should set out to entertain themselves first, to sort of like have fun. That's on the, on the, whatever you define fun. And then you will get it. You will have that magical transference. You will feel, something that happened 58 years ago, that she sat down and wrote a song, and here we are 58 years later feeling the same buzz. And I don't think it was intended to I'm going to write a song that will be listened to 50 years from now. No, it was because I need to write this urgency. And I think what, going back to your point, was, I think the wine metaphor was great. And I think one of the things that hopefully this book does, and this kind of conversation, which is just getting started, I've taken some slack for this, but I think this is what the Dead books of the future are going to be, because there aren't going to be people around to talk about their experiences. They're all going to be dead. Not dead, but I mean deceased. All we'll have is the music. So it really will be about, what is the difference between 73 and 74, and what happens in the 80s? Is there a good tour in the 90s, and what is it, and how much Garcia, and that kind of stuff to me is worth talking about and thinking about, because you're really talking about the stuff that you're talking about, which is, how can we get at the good stuff, the transformative stuff, the stuff that you come back to again and again and again and again, that you need in your life, because if you don't have it, you will be psychically diminished. That's the good stuff, Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they make it easy for people to land on their own preferences, like somebody
Yeah.
who's just discovering, because they weren't the most consistent band when it came to momentum in
No.
their set lists. And so anybody who even has it in them to enjoy their music, you're going to run into roadblocks in their live recordings, things that just that don't do it for you. And your taste is going to get more defined as you go. That's why I said, anybody who starts to get into this stuff sounds like a wine aficionado, because you're like, well, I like this. And
Yeah.
your discernment starts to take
Which is
shape.
great. Which is much preferable than this fundamentalist sense of, no, I'm a deadhead. I know people. A guy told me a story recently, and this is supposed to be people telling me stories. They sort of like, you seem to have a critical perspective, so I'll tell you this story. I have a friend, and he's a deadhead. And this guy's a day. He said, well, my friend, I tried to turn him on to, I don't know who it was. It was some bluegrass musician. And he looked at me and said, why would I listen to Earl Scruggs when I can listen to Jerry playing Old and the Way? Which is antithetical to me what Garcia was all about. Garcia is a guy who went on record and says, I don't like periods. I like question marks. This beatnik ethic, in the sense of, it's all opinions. We're making this shit up as we go along. It's a very Zen idea. As opposed to, no, there's a codified set of, music, and we listen to this. We don't speak badly about Jerry or the Dead, or it's laughable in the sense that it's so anti what the Dead was. We're very much Carnival, sort of like, let's put on costumes and make fun of everything and see what happens. There wasn't some great master plan. It was, trying to avoid having a job for a long time, getting paid to do what you like to do.
Well, I find that happens whenever something becomes a church of something. I find that with when people talk about their own ethnic identities as well. It's like, you're
Right.
only supposed to celebrate your own culture. You're not supposed to, as someone who is native to a culture, you're not supposed to, you probably find this with being Canadian as well, right? There are some people that expect you can only
Sure.
um you can only applaud it. You can only sort of
Yeah.
point to its most sort of hokey,
Yeah. And cliche
appealing
written,
features.
cliche. In fact, the book I was working on before we went on, we hooked up here online, was it's a book on fundamentalism. It's a very short book. It's more like a long essay. It's called Stuck in the Middle with You, an essay on fundamentalism and dancing. And it's really about just that, in the sense that, I love the quote by Dr. Johnson, Samuel Johnson. He said patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. I always like that. If you got nothing else, you got the color of your skin, or you got where you were born, or what your politics are. And I just find the culture that we live in is so rigid and binary. You're left or you're right. I don't know anyone in reality who's like one, crazy people like Donald Trump. But I mean, anybody who doesn't say, well, on the one hand, but you can't be that way. You have to say, no, I'm a left winger. Oh, I'm a right winger. I'm a Republican. I mean, it's insane. It's literally insane in the sense that it's shrinking your ability to experience the world and be a part of the world.
Sure.
So it's not a political book. It's really just a book about. And it's interesting because near the end, there's not any Grateful Dead in the book, except at the end, and it was completely nothing to do with this book. It was an interview that David Gans did with Phil Lesh, the bass player, once, and I use it at the end of the book. when Gans talks to him about, he said something like, "Oh, the Grateful Dead was the longest running musical argument," and Lesh says, "No, it's not an argument. Well, it's not a verbal or it's not a personal argument. It's a musical argument. And musical arguments are discussions. You know, you have a fugue where the two different things talk to each other and they highlight each other. They almost benefit each other. So I'm 100% with you on that. And I think not only is it dangerous culturally, this kind of like binary way we are, but I just think it's just not an interesting way to live your life. You're really close. I mean, I know why people do it. You feel more solid when you say, well, my father was Republican and I'm a Republican, or I'm a left winger. It makes you feel like you've got some solidity that you don't really have, you know. And I just think that it's just really and we're all guilty of it. I'm not standing on high and saying it. We get, you know, it makes us feel good to think.
No, yeah, and it happens with musical subcultures that, you know, if you're a part of a musical subculture, there are again all these like sort of cliches that are it's just surface level, and it's like, well, if you love something, you're experiencing it at a deep enough level that you can.
Oh yeah, you have to dress a certain way, or you're not allowed to like. I have people, you know, who I would get into the den. They say, "Oh, old hippies," and I'm like, "Do you know that they played for like in 1977 when the Ramones, who I revere, you know, were full of energy and great. Do you know the Dead were playing like hour and a half consecutively in most of the second sets in '77, and like consecutively, song into song. I mean, a lot of drugs as well, but the point is." Every cliche corrodes and falsifies, and it kind of like puts a shield over our eyes, or you know, a scrim that we can't really see. And but that takes a certain amount of courage. It means that you have to be able to say, I don't care what people say, I don't care what the majority are saying, I don't care that I don't have a label. You know, that's why when I say it's Deadhead, people say, oh, you know, no, I don't. I don't like crowds. I don't wear tie dye. You know.
Well, and I mean, we should all be able to express, maybe not critique. I know you've used that term because you're
Right.
coming from a literary background,
Right.
but we should all be able to just express our reservations about something that we might love to the bone, you know?
Oh, and I think that's the essence of how you do love it. I mean, when you truly love something, that
I mean,
means
because you can't be in a marriage without knowing what your reservations are.
I was just going to use that metaphor. Yeah, exactly. And that's how you get a better marriage, because you don't quietly harbor resentment for 8 years. You say, you know what, that drives. Oh, you know what about you? And then you work, you get better. And that's a great example of how dialogue, or what do you want to call it, can eventually morph it into something maybe not better. You know, it's not the same as the first 2 weeks you were dating. I mean, I've been with my wife for 33 years. It's changed. In many ways, it's gotten deeper and better. But you'd be lying if you're saying it's not the same thing. And the first time I can remember the first time that we held hands. I mean, I don't even remember saying, I'm at my parents' house right now, I'm visiting my parents. I don't remember saying goodbye, I love you. I'm sure I did. I just don't remember because I say it 8 times a day. But that doesn't mean it's dead and it's over. It means it's changed. I also feel like this is the one person in the world who has my back. And that didn't happen after the first 2 weeks. And so it's complex, it's rich, it's interesting. And that's why
that's why we need
That's why we need art, because art allows us to be messy. You know, you write an op-ed page, you got to know what you're saying. If you write an op-ed page, I believe this, here's my thesis statement, and you have this. Where art says, you know, it's very gray, it's very complex, it's very messy, it's very, but beautiful and ugly too, and wonderful. But to me, that's not depressing. That's kind of exciting. But I'm comfortable with messiness because that's what artists do, right?
well, and for your spouse to be able to say,
right,
yeah, I've got his back.
right.
He had to go through
Right.
things about you she doesn't like to know. You know what I'm saying? Like she had to be clear and walk through the muck of like, man, this is fucking testing me, my patience. This is annoying, or I even hate this about my husband, right?
Absolutely.
Like, or I can't stand this. To then know what the sort of the final balance sheet says. In spite of all that, I'm still with you. That means more.
That's remarkable. That's like saying, here's all the things I don't like about the political party, but I'm still it. And that to me is healthy. That means fresh air is coming in. I just find most discourse today, and not just political, like you say, musical or whatever, it's just so doctrinaire, and I just find it quite boring. And it'll just change. 5 years from now, there'll be a new thing that's the truth, and we have to bow before it. In 5 years, that's a nice thing about getting old. I mean, there's a lot of downside about getting older, but one of the positives is you get older, you realize this shit just changes constantly. The people who are this is it, and if you disagree, then we're going to shut you
Right.
down.
The regimes
Right.
cycle through.
But what doesn't change, and what I'm hoping to write about in the next book, is what doesn't change is human beings who have this incessant need. We have this need to be right, to be on the right team, to not be on the bad side. And so what can we do about that? So I didn't want to write about politics. I just, but I wanted to write about that impulse we have that often gets manipulated by politicians and to serve their purposes, and you see that with, I've done some work, as you know, for the Grateful Dead, who are owned by Warner Brothers. So they like the idea that it's all good and that everyone should buy everything all the time. Buy every era, buy everything because it's all good. That's really a good corporate attitude. That's not what I'm doing. So a bit of a fly in the ointment there. They still put up with me, but I think they kind of hide me at the back. The crazy.
How did you? That brings up two questions. One obvious: how did you get into that relationship, being a latecomer? And also, I've always wondered, from Warner Brothers' perspective, why are the Dead profitable to them? Because their studio albums didn't sell much.
Right.
They must have had a stake in some other aspect of their business. Because
yeah, I'll answer the second question first. I mean, Warner Brothers was their publisher early on, but they eventually left Warner Brothers in 1972 to start their own record label, which is an amazing story. A failure, but what an amazing effort to sort
right, and then went to Arista also.
Yeah, but when it all goes down, when they basically everybody goes broke, they sign with Clive Davis. So Warner Brothers bought the Dead's music, or they licensed it. I don't know what it was, 25 years or whatever, because I think they were aware that boomers and classic rock and all that kind of thing, and that's how they treat it. But it's also wonderful in the sense that I really did discover a lot of the music through the official release stuff, the Dick's picks and Dave's picks and all of that. So again, both sides. In terms of me doing stuff with the Dead, it was all completely coincidental. I was working on this book, all the years combined, when I got an email from Dave Lemieux, who's the Dead's legacy manager, who had read Estates Large and Small. And he said, hey, I liked your book, and because of the Dead stuff, that's probably why you read it. But he actually finished it. Most people, and he said, I liked your book, and we chatted a bit. And he's Canadian. He lives in Victoria, BC. And we chatted, and then at one point, I suggested, oh, you should release this, and you should never do. And he said, well, maybe not that, but would you be interested in doing some notes? So Dave's picks 45, the two shows from 77. And then I guess they didn't mind them, because a few months later, they asked me to do the box set.
Here Comes Sunshine. Right.
Yeah, which you put very kindly in the spin list. And I think what Dave likes and what seems to have worked is that, I guess, because I'm coming at it from a different point of view. I'm sort of coming at it from a late arrival, someone from a different genre. I'm not in the music business. I'm a writer. I write a lot about music, but I'm not, I'm not like you. I'm not a real I'm not a journalist. I'm not a historian. Like, I'm just a guy who likes the Dead, who, writes books. So I think there's, I think what Dave's tried to do is have a variety of different voices talk about the music. So he's got people writing who were there and knew the people. He's got people who went to the shows. So it's kind of a kaleidoscopic deal. I wouldn't want a steady diet of me would not be a good thing. But once in a while, I come off the bench. I might be doing something in 2024. And it's been a really nice, because simultaneously I was writing this book. So I thought, wow, what a cool, synergy, as they call it in the corporate world. So, so I actually have a lot of people found out about this book through my connection to the Dead's, the official Dead stuff, which has been great, because not a lot of people know, a mid-list Canadian novelist, it's like, who is this guy to write about the Grateful Dead, So it kind of gave me some credentials or some, and it put my name before a lot of people. I've had a couple relationships, good friendships start with people who started with the notes, the Dave's picks, and Here Comes, and then got into some of the other stuff, like books. So it's just been wonderful that way. And I think that's a wonderful aspect of what that Dead world is like, in the sense there's all these connections and they're all kind of tangential, but that's okay. We're all just delighted amateurs who are just sort of floating around, the Dead world. But yeah, so it was pretty great. I owe Dave a lot, because he sort of put my name before Deadheads, which probably normally wouldn't happen. But it worked out really well, because I had also had a book coming out.
Now, you wrote three novels before you started delving into nonfiction, and I wanted to ask you about changing hats, but in your case, you haven't exactly changed hats. Sometimes you wear them both. You sort of wear them
Yeah,
both at the
right,
same time,
right.
and there are
Yeah,
novelistic elements to the way you write about the music in
yeah,
all the years combined.
yeah,
You once said you don't start with an idea, you start with an obsession. And
yeah.
I think that unifies your fiction with your nonfiction as somebody who hasn't read any of your books.
Well,
But
you
just,
have. I mean, you got a taste for. I mean, to me, the most important thing is not finishing the book. It's you've got a taste of how I write, and
but
that's the personality. You know, that's the personality. Not so much what I said on the last page, but oh, okay, this guy. Yeah, he mixes genres around. He's not afraid to, try to be funny or to use an expletive or to use a metaphor that you wouldn't read in a rock review or something. Yeah.
and
You know,
and I feel like your prose is inhabited by people who are drawn to the types of things you like to write nonfiction books about, or at least that's the impression I
yeah.
got.
No, no, you're right. I mean, yeah, I think that obsession quote is a good one because I don't think you can make that stuff. I mean, I suppose you can. Again, coming back to professionally, for me, I can't. I have to write about what matters to me, and it may not be what literally happened to me. I wasn't a used bookseller whose bookstore got closed during COVID, but I
Right, and you
understood.
didn't get divorced either.
Right? Yeah, yeah. That was actually a hard part to write. I remember writing the first draft and gave it to my wife. She said, "I don't believe this," because I had him in the book be divorced. But in the rewrite, he just lived with this woman for 8 years. I mean, it's a very subtle thing, but it's like learning who Phil is. So for me, I've got to write a first draft to find out kind of what the book's about. Then you go back and say, "Oh no, he wouldn't do that. Oh, I should put that there," that kind of thing. But what you say is true. The only danger I think sometimes is that perhaps I do get a little too essayistic in my fiction, and that's something I try to do near the end. But the two do work together because I think writing is writing. I don't make a division between good journalism and good fiction. Some of my favorite, I mean, Virginia Woolf is one of my favorite writers, and I'm not a big novel fan of hers. I love her nonfiction, but it's the same voice, you know. So to me, yeah, it's really about I'm not comparing myself to a musician who are the highest form, but someone like Garcia, except for maybe Old in the Way where he's playing banjo. I don't know banjo playing enough to distinguish, but I always know when he's playing. I know him by the sound of his guitar. And that's the same thing with Peter Green or just about any real musician. Is that I can walk into a room if Jerry's playing on, he's guesting on someone else. Oh, is that Jerry Garcia? I mean, that to me in a
You're
world of
saying a
so much,
writer, you're saying a writer has
yeah,
that too.
has that voice. And if they don't, I'm not particularly interested in reading them. I mean, it could be a valuable book, it could be a reference book, it could be a good, solid sort of like meat and potato biography. But ultimately, books I go back to and reread, I want to hear their voice again. I want to be in their company. Every once in a while, when I feel stupid, I pick up a Virginia Woolf essay and go, "Okay, smart enough. Be a little better." And it's not what she says; it's the way that she writes makes me feel I'm getting a little sloppy, a little lazy, a little. And to me, that is ultimately what we want in our art and in their relationships with people. We want there to be something. It's like saying to somebody, the American writer William Gass once gave this metaphor when someone said, you wouldn't introduce, say, oh, you haven't seen somebody in a number of years, say, oh, I got married or whatever. Oh, really? What's she like? And you would hand the person their resume. Of course, that's absurd. You would tell them about them. But more importantly, they would have to meet the person to really understand who they were. It wouldn't be enough to summarize or to just give you'd have to experience them. And for me to experience a writer or a musician is to experience their style. And that to me was something interesting about The Dead. I got into it because of Garcia's guitar, first and foremost. I had those good songs behind me, those good Americana songs, but it was the guitar. And so I listened with the headphones on. But then I would listen to Phil Lesh, the bass player, and think, geez, he's really not holding down the bottom. Oh, this is why they're a shitty rock and roll band. This is why punks hate them. There's no bottom to their music. Phil's up here, he's here, he's here. Phil never played the bass before Garcia asked him to be the bass player. He was into Stockhausen, composing clouds. He was like, oh, this shit, I can pull this off. Take some speed. I can learn this in a weekend. And then he quickly got bored. That first show in the book, you can hear he's hugging the bottom. He's playing with the drummers. By 68, he's let out for the territories. No interest at all in holding down the bottom. Fascinating stuff. Weir, who can barely play the guitar at the beginning, they almost kick him out of the band because he's holding them back. He becomes this unique rhythm guitar player. If you're listening with headphones on, you're drifting toward Garcia and you go, what's Weir doing over here? Weir's giving him something tasty to respond to. Sometimes he does, sometimes Weir doesn't play. The best of the Dead, there's a lot of silence, which is why I'm not a big fan of the 80s and 90s sound, because they're using the 32 tracks. The stadium is full. It's just this big, big sound. It sounds like fucking U2 or something. And the Dead at their best, even if they were playing, in front of 30,000 people in 1973, there's a lot of space. And it reminds me a lot, and I quote in the book, a lot when I think it was Herbie Hancock and he was playing with Miles Davis, because when Miles Davis put together those Bitches Brew bands and all that stuff, you have 3 keyboard players, you have a Hancock, Korea, and sometimes Hancock's like, sometimes I don't know what to play, there's so much going on. And then Miles in his inimitable voice says, then don't play anything, motherfucker. Don't play anything. It never occurred to this genius piano player, Herbie Hancock. Oh, yeah, I don't have to play anything. That's beautiful. It's just beautiful. And the Dead's best music, I think, has that. And I don't know how we got on this topic, but that's something else. I came through Garcia, but the rest of the band has these interesting. And when Keith Godchaux joins the band as a piano player, it becomes a different band. He never played rock and roll. He's more of a jazz guy. So the music from 72, 73 starts getting wider. It becomes less linear and more bigger sound, but less sound. And I find that, and that was one of the fun things about the book, sort of like tracking those changes. Yeah.
So
I don't know how we got on that topic, but
that's okay. That's okay. You've argued that being a non-musician is an asset in writing about music. I think I understand why, but if you could briefly explain why you think that is.
Well, I have musicians friends, and if we're sitting listening to music and something, really cool happens, my friend Chris will say, oh yeah, well, they're going from a D chord to an E, then he's pulling back and he's hitting. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. To me, it's like, and I use a metaphor, or because I have to translate it into something, because I don't know music.
Into a sensation. You have to translate it into a sensation. You don't just talk about what it is, the mechanics and the nuts and bolts.
Exactly. And that's the worst kind of like jazz liner notes. You get a new CD and you open it up and you read it. It's like, what are they talking about? It's left me behind. And I think good criticism, whether it be literary or musical, brings you closer to the music, whether you like it or not, or even if you're pointing something out, but it brings you closer. It makes you want to go listen to the music, good criticism, or read the book or something. An essay on Moby Dick that's good should make you want to read Moby Dick, not read more criticism. And I think that's one of the things that not being a musician or having a wide terminology, I could Google it if I wanted to, come off like I knew what I was talking about. But I prefer to use metaphors or similes or, like you say, sensation, because I think that's ultimately, that's what music is. It's not an intellectual thing. It's very somatic. It starts with your body. And so I think that's been advantageous. You always try to take advantage of your ignorance.
So last question, where does one start? Where do you recommend someone start? I know that's almost an impossible question, but where does one start? And then I'll leave you with that.
No, I think that's a great question, because for me, it was the Americana stuff, American Beauty and Working Man's Dead, which, by the way, both came out in 1970. So if you think if they waited and put that as a double album, think of that. So those 2 albums, and that really roots you in the songcraft, because remember that Garcia and Hunter and Weir, all those guys came from folk, jug band, and Garcia bluegrass. They came from songs. They really knew that American songbook, that Harry Smith. They really knew that book. So songs were important. And then I think at that point, then you can sort of like, you're hugging the shore a bit. You can go to sea just a little bit. I mean, drum solos to me are just not my, I still, oh God. But when a new show is released or something, or I look at it and I think, wow, there's a 32-minute Dark Star into an 18-minute Eyes of the World into a 9-minute China Doll. Sit back and let this thing happen. And so I would start with, now I have another friend, sort of a post-punk kind of guy or whatever, and Hate the Dead, but he's into spacey stuff, Hawk Wind and all sorts of jazz. So I started him with like 72, 73, 74. When he come over, we'd hang out, we'd listen to the second sets only. No first sets, because I don't want to hear any songs. I want to hear skronk and space and all that. So once that happens, like, oh, that's interesting. And then sort of like, so it's kind of like a cult. You kind of recruit. You sort of, whatever you're into, the Dead have it. They got songs, they got space, they got, in 70, when people came out after Live Dead came out, the big psychedelic album, and people are ready to, they've taken their acid, they're sitting down, and everybody comes out with acoustic guitars and harmonicas. It's like, what's this? And you can hear it with the headphones on. People are saying, what's going on? you can hear Garcia famously say, "Relax, man. We got you all night. Just sit down and listen. This isn't
That's
about
funny.
you. It's about us. And if you want to be part of this party, great." That's the epigraph I use. I don't have to go. The epigraph I use from Bob Weir was the 10:13 or the 2:13:70 show, where he says before the show begins, "This ain't a show, it's a party." And
Right. You mentioned that at the beginning of the in the
yeah,
intro.
I mean, he didn't mean like woo party. He meant like we're just a bunch of people hang out together with similar tastes. Hopefully, we can all have a good time. I'm not here to entertain you. You don't have to sit quietly, and you can do whatever you want. And that's part of, again, the argument of the book, in the sense that I think that's lost. You can't get that when you're playing at a football stadium when there's security guards and policemen, and there's wonderful things about that experience, I'm sure. But for me, there's nothing better for me to go to see live music in a club that has 80 people in it, or 100 people, or maybe 150. It's big enough that you're bigger than yourself, but you're also small enough that it's a bunch of human beings and not the entertained and the entertainers,
Sure.
So anyway, yeah.
Well, listen, man, those are all my questions. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. And I'm stoked to post this. This is going straight to YouTube, so it's not going out live. But
yeah, I hope not. But anytime, yeah, anytime you want to chat, man, just let me know. Good talking.
Yeah, my pleasure. And if I have any fact check questions, I'll hit you back.
I haven't got a job. Just send me an email.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, cool, man. All right, take care.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.